Zapatero avoids going to jail. Let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to a new edition of Medidas Cautelares. Pay attention because Judge Calama has already issued a ruling regarding former Prime Minister José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero. Pay attention because Judge Calama refuses to impose any precautionary measure on Zapatero in the context of the Plus Ultra case. Let's go with this breaking news because we do indeed have the judge's ruling and we're going to discuss it. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Of Medidas Cautelares, and we're going to share this latest information on the screen right now. Attention, the judge of the National Court, José Luis Calama, has rejected the imposition of precautionary measures for the former Prime Minister, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, after his statement as a person under investigation in the Plus Ultra case, which had been requested by the Prosecutor's Office and the private prosecuting parties. The Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office had requested the court appearance. The court, the withdrawal of his passport and the ban on leaving the country, while the Unified Private Prosecution had joined the request of the Public Prosecutor's Office. In the case of Vox, Actiware, Liberum and Justicia Europa, they had alternatively requested, as I told you in the previous video, pre-trial detention. Well, in his order, the judge of the National Court, José Luis Calama, explains that the adoption of a precautionary measure always requires a particularly rigorous assessment, because it involves an early restriction of fundamental rights that can only be justified if there are indications of criminal activity and a proven procedural risk. Calama points out that the statement of the person under investigation, pay attention, this is very important, has not managed to refute the reasonable indications of criminal conduct presented in the indictment order, which come from various and different sources of evidence. Among them, the case of the devices seized during the various authorized searches and seizures, Justicia Subsidiaria Contado. Luis explains that the adoption of various strict precautionary measures implies a statement, he points out, investigated rationally regarding public aid funds given by the government to the investigated, aiming to refute certain commercial companies considered institutional. Rationales, which implies multiple commercial companies, violence of the property in its own. To these indications, Judge Calama adds, the preliminary analysis of the content of the device made available to the Spanish courts by the judicial authorities of the United States is added, and the discovery in his office of pieces of jewelry, whose value exceeds 1.3 million euros, of which, to this day, neither their origin nor their corresponding tax and customs clearance has been proven. However, in contrast to the above, the judge takes into account that Rodríguez Zapatero is a person of public notoriety, a circumstance that clearly makes it difficult for him to be in a position of being unlocatable or to discreetly evade the proceedings. His public visibility and clear ties to the territory, together with the absence of any indication of evasive intent, reasonably rule out the existence of a real risk of flight, and current, he warns, for Judge Calama, another requirement that would justify a precautionary measure, such as the risk of hiding or destroying evidence, is also not observed, since he considers that the relevant elements have already been seized and the investigation does not depend on actions that the accused could obstruct. In this context, he concludes that imposing court appearances or retaining the passport as a prohibition on leaving the country is not necessary, since there is no procedural risk that needs to be addressed through such measures. Their adoption would constitute an unjustified restriction of the right to personal freedom and free movement, incompatible with the principle of proportionality and with the prohibition of configuring precautionary measures as an early punishment. And this is the breaking news I had to share with you. Zapatero does not go to prison. Although some of the private prosecutors involved in the case had requested it, Zapatero gets off. But it's also important to point out that in that ruling by Judge José Luis Calama, he emphasizes that Zapatero's statement did not convince him at all. To refute all the criminal evidence against him in that order, laying out the charges for a total of 6 crimes. Because we're talking about half a dozen crimes allegedly committed by the former president of the government, Jose Luis Rodriguez Zapatero, related to the bailout of the airline Plus Ultra. Among them, membership in a criminal organization, forgery of commercial documents, money laundering, influence peddling, and the last two related to the famous jewels. The jewels that had previously preliminarily been appraised at 1.3 million euros, and from which the last two crimes arise, possible tax offenses and jewel smuggling. So we're talking about half a dozen crimes, but as we just mentioned, Judge Calama considers that Zapatero is a public figure who would find it very difficult to evade the action of justice, that is, to flee. And in addition, we should also add that, according to Judge Calama, the investigation is very advanced and there are no pending actions that Zapatero himself could destroy or obstruct within the framework of the investigation. That's why he considers that there's no need to take away his passport or require him to appear in court every 15 days, and of course, much less that request for provisional imprisonment by the popular accusations that had been requested during Zapatero's appearance, which, as I told you in the previous video, lasted almost 3 hours and in which he only answered Judge Calama and his defense. So, as I was saying, Zapatero avoids going to provisional prison, it must be said. But of course, I think this ruling by Judge Calama also serves to reinforce all the evidence against the former Prime Minister. And that means that, even though he avoids prison for now, it doesn't mean he won't have to sit in the dock during a trial and that he could be convicted and then, at that moment, have to go to prison. But for now, that's the breaking news. Now, Zapatero avoids being placed in provisional detention, and Judge Calama, from the Plus Ultra case, refuses to impose any precautionary measures. That's all for this edition of Precautionary Measures with Miguel Angel Perez. I hope you enjoyed the video and everything was clear with this breaking news. If that's the case, you know you can leave your comments, opinions, and keep supporting this community and the Precautionary Measures channel with Miguel Angel Perez. In addition to leaving your opinions, comments, and sharing, watching the video with whoever you want, also by becoming members, subscribers. You already know you can become a member like the chosen ones for under 3 euros a month or a supreme member for under 7 euros a month. You can also make contributions via Bizum at 627-556-370, 627-556-370. Most importantly, as I always say, is making sure everyone gets this information because knowledge is power. See you soon.